So should you tidy up the garden? You kind of think, oh, everything's looking a bit dull and, you know, things are brown and doesn't look too good. Should I be cutting everything back? No, don't cut everything back. It's tempting, but you don't need to, because actually these things are going to be really helpful for wildlife, and also because it's nice to see something. So the only pruning you need to do at this time of year is really just cut back things so that they don't get what's called windrock, which means when there are strong winds, they rock the plant, and that creates a sort of hole around its root, and then they can rot off. So tall roses, things like tall buddleias, other tall shrubs that are not, that grow a lot you know, buddleia grow very, very quickly. Other plants like lavateria does that too. You can cut off a third down. It doesn't really matter how you cut it, just cut off a third, and that'll help keep the plant less prone to this windrock, as I'm saying. Obviously, if there's plant growth which has grown too much over a path near your gate, it's sensible to cut that back. It doesn't really matter. And most of those plants that you're going to do, you will prune again in the spring down to the recommended height that they ought to be. I mean, basically pruning is done either after flowering in the spring or sort of later in the spring, or in the spring to promote growth that's going to flower in that year. So windrock's the problem. Just prune back a third, and that's all you need to do. In terms of your herbaceous perennials, so if you look at the bottom of this picture, those sort of plants that are at the bottom can look straggly, can look like they're rotting. Yes, you can cut them back down to the ground level, where you probably will see some growth at the bottom. So things that are really rotting and not very pleasant, and you don't like the look of them, cut them down. But if you've got plants which have lovely seed heads, or stems look nice, or even, of course, still flowering, some things will carry on flowering until it really is frosty and really cold. You want to keep them, because not only do they provide interest in your borders, but also they provide shelter and food and nesting material for wildlife. So don't cut back now, unless it's very untidy, and then just the plants that really need it, that are straggly. Leave the cutting back to spring, when you know things are going to very quickly grow and fill the space. So you don't have to prune too much. That's what else can we do? Well, while we're looking around our garden, we're thinking about wildlife too. So what jobs do we need to do to make sure that we're still looking after our wildlife? Well, if we've got an apple tree or any fruit trees, it doesn't matter if you leave the apples. You're not likely to get wasps now, but late flying butterflies or other insects might be using them as a food source. Anything like old twigs or logs or garden debris, you can push into a corner, into a pile if you have space, and that makes a habitat pile for insects and creatures to hide in during the winter. If you've got bird feeders, keep topping them up, and they need to be calorie rich, so things like peanuts or sunflower hearts, which maybe you've grown some sunflowers, so you can leave them out and the hearts are there. Suet balls, and there's some really good trellis fact sheets which I've put at the bottom of this page. Feed garden birds this winter, and there's various things you can do and activities you can do indoors to make things like suet balls and things like that, and then those can be topped up all winter. If you can plant nectar-rich spring flowering bulbs like crocus or great hyacinth or daffodils, that's great for especially early flowering bulbs, again, producing nectar for early bees and so on. If you have a bee hotel, it's recommended that rather than leaving it out to get damp and wet, that you place it in a dry, cold place like a shed or a garage, and then put it out again in the spring. So along with not tidying up too much, these are some of the things that you can do, which are fairly easy to do and quite fun for groups to do, because certainly people like to feed birds. and so on, and they like to plant bulbs. So those are jobs that can be done.